Welcome to our State of Education, a monthly conversation here on 760 WJR, where we explore the future of Michigan's K-12 schools. I'm Lloyd Jackson, and I'm joined by my co-host, Angelique Power, President and CEO of the Skillman Foundation. Angelique, good to have you here.
I'm so excited for this show. In Michigan, education, we are right now 41st in the country. And it isn't actually for a lack of good ideas or for people who work in the systems who really know what to do. Often it is just that folks don't work together and they don't break down conversations into real talk. And that's really what we want to do. On this show, we're going to bring in a lot of different people, folks that we work with at Skillman, students and teachers and family members and after-school providers and policymakers, and we're going to talk shop and we're going to figure out solutions.
And it's very important to have all of those voices, and because we have all these great jobs that we want to bring here to the state of Michigan, but we need to make sure our kids are educated.
Our employers are asking the question about K through 12 education, and also even if you don't have a child in the schools, for every dollar that's invested in public schools, then property values around that school increase by $4.
Wow.
So it really is the benefit to not just a child who will have, a more prosperous life, but to neighbors across Michigan. Prosperity in Michigan is tied to education.
It is, and we're really talking about the future of our state, the economy, the equity, the well-being of every child. So whether you're in Detroit or the UP, a parent or a policymaker, this conversation is really for them.
That's right, and actually you're queuing up where we're going so well. I can't wait for the conversation.
All right, well, let's get started. We'll be right back with more of our State of Education here on 760 WJR. Welcome back to our State of Education. I'm Lloyd Jackson, along with Angelique Powers from the Skillman Foundation. The governor's race, we know it's in 2026, but already the candidates are talking about issues. Education, one of the big ones.
There was an op-ed that was in Crain's. I don't know if everybody read it, but the title was Education Must Be Job One for Our Next Governor. And they had a lot of great questions that were in there, but one of the quotes that I wanted to read was, anyone who aspires to be governor must make improving K through 12 education outcomes a top priority. The turnaround of Michigan schools is a gargantuan task that is not optional if our state is to have any hope of becoming competitive. Voters deserve to know how the candidates will tackle it. Welcome, Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist. We're so excited to have you here.
I'm proud to be here, and I couldn't agree more that education is a foundational issue, and it's hard to build a strong building on a shaky foundation. And as a parent of 3 children who are in Detroit public schools right now, like they're literally in school right now. My baby girl's finishing kindergarten, my twins are finishing the 6th grade. This is a clear and present and urgent issue to me as a public servant, and certainly as the next governor. It's something I'll make as a key priority.
I have 6 questions for you, and we have probably 9 minutes, so we won't get to all of them.
Don't filibuster. Is what she said.
And the last one is my favorite, but I'm going to try to just run through them with you, and
Sure.
we're going to ask all the gubernatorial candidates the same question. Name a teacher who's had a significant impact on you and tell us why.
I mean, there's so many. It's hard to name one. I'm going to sneak in 2. So the first I'll share is, her name was Elaine Gilbert, Mrs. Gilbert. She was my 3rd grade teacher, and I also had a 3-4 split class. So when we moved out of Detroit into Farmington, Mrs. Gilbert was my first teacher. She welcomed me as a black kid, and I was the 2nd black kid in the building at Longacre Elementary School when I got there. So it's a whole new experience, and but she welcomed me. She recognized that I had potential, but the most important thing she did is she told me and my parents I couldn't see. She was like, Garland's really smart. He's a good kid, but but he can't see. So she told them I needed glasses. And so she's the reason I got glasses in the 3rd grade.
Wow.
And you know, that can see that as a metaphor for what teachers can do. They see things that other adults can't. They are observant, they are responsive, they are enabling, and they position people for success. And that's what Mrs. Gilbert did for me.
Well, that was a really good answer. I know you wanted to squeeze in another one. I just wanted to say that was very, very good. Are you sure you still want to?
It's all good.
Okay.
That's all good. We know what that.
So, on a serious note, we've been talking a lot about how Michigan is 41st in terms of educational outcomes. You know, Skillman, we work on this all the time. We don't think it's a silver bullet solution to it. But should you become the next governor, what would you do in your role in particular to help us to leapfrog ahead and set the stage for, you know, the next decade of change?
Well, we have to recognize that this is absolutely paramount for our medium and long-term success and sustainability as the state of Michigan. And so one of the things that I think about is we have actually made some progress in solving some structural issues when it's come to public education. The funding, for example, like the fact that we're going to eclipse $10,000 per student is an important milestone. But we have to go forward now and be focused really with a level of urgency on results and outcomes. I want every parent to experience what I did when I heard my baby girl sound out words for the first time independently. And so what that means is actually looking and trusting the education professionals who, if you speak to a teacher, he or she will tell you what it takes for the kids in their classroom to read. They know exactly what they have to do tactically, you know, the materials they need, the resources they need. And right now, there are too many barriers stand between those education professionals actually doing the thing that they know will work. This is not a question of like how do kids learn to read. The pedagogy of learning how to read is a thing that we've known for a long time. The question is in execution and what stands in the way of that execution. So I will focus relentlessly on resourcing and equipping those education professionals to do what they need to do and to make it easy to do the things that they know work and not force them to do stuff that they know will not. And I think a lot of times the frustration that I hear from education professionals is the inability to be able to do the things they know will be the interventions and the supports and the services that kids need to be able to read and to read now. But they can make up gaps in a year. Like they can do that. They can make up more than a year gap in a year if they're able to do what they need to do.
I'm going to come back to that per pupil level that you talked about a little bit later when we talk about things that are happening at the federal level and how it might impact Michigan.
Sure.
But Michigan, you know, we are proudly purple, and education is not red and it's not blue. So our public schools are for everyone, and we need to find common ground to move forward. Bipartisanship is going to be super important on education issues. In this moment, what gives you hope that that is possible in Michigan?
I think that, first of all, you know, hope is something that you have to decide to have. And so I choose not to be hopeless, but I choose to be hopeful. And part of what is true is everywhere in Michigan, there are kids in a community who will not be educated without public schools. And so we have to make sure we are encouraging the support and success of those schools. And again, I'm grounding that in the education professionals there and the facilities that that those education professionals are working in, that the state has to be there to invest in them. So I am hopeful because when I go to Republican districts, like I serve the whole state of Michigan. I've been to all 83 counties of Michigan at least 3 times, and I've visited schools in all 83 counties of Michigan. And what I see are parents, our community members, our business leaders clamoring to have stronger facilities and better support for the young people so that they can get those better education outcomes. Like the fact that the constituents, the people, the residents, the families of Michigan are clamoring for that. And regardless of where they vote on which side of the ballot, like they know that their kids need to be educated. So I am hopeful because our priorities are going to be right if we follow the priorities of the people of Michigan. And you're not going to talk to a parent who wants their kid to go to a bad school or who wants their kid to not be able to read. There perhaps is not more consensus on anything except that people want their children to be able to be educated and do so at a public school.
So at the federal level, there's so much happening. A lot of the conversation we're hearing is about cuts to the budget. So we're looking at $2.2 billion of Michigan's school budget, which comes from the Federal Department of Education, another $2 billion coming from programs like Medicaid. Cuts have been proposed in these areas with the Department of Education going away and elsewhere. Medicaid is the fourth largest source of federal funding for K through 12 schools. DPSCD, 75% of our students are actually, they rely on Medicaid.
Yeah.
75% of students in the Arvon School District in the UP rely on Medicaid. 79% of students in the Carlton School District outside of Bay City. What are we going to do to face these shortfalls?
Well, first and foremost, the best way to respond to this is to do everything in our power to try to prevent them from happening. And so I am proud of the parents, of the students, of the education professionals who are speaking out and looking to hold accountable the Republican legislators in Congress who are voting for that. John James voted for that. Every single Republican member of our delegation voted for these cuts to Medicaid, has stood there silently as the president has lit a match on the Department of Education and the supports that department provides for students with special needs who live in every single county of Michigan, students who need additional support so they can be successful. So I think first and foremost, we have to continue that advocacy and that leadership to try to make sure that we can, stop the bleeding from this dangerous president and his allies and imitators. At the state level, we have to again, prioritize making sure that we protect our state's potential and continue to invest in our education system, our educators, and our students by doing that. So as we are in budget negotiation, finally, I can't even say finally because the House hasn't presented a budget yet, but hopefully they will be ready to sit down with us in the month of June so we can get an education budget done by the end of the month of June, like the law says we need to, so that our schools will know that Michigan still cares about our kids.
That's fantastic. I didn't get to my last question, which means you're going to have to come back another time.
I can do that. Well, thank you for having me.
Our State of Education here on 760 WJR. It's Our State of Education here on 760 WJR, and the gubernatorial race is going to be heating up. I know it's at 26, Angelique, but it's heating up, and education is tops on many lists of priorities.
Lots of media outlets are starting to report on that education is really something, and especially in the gubernatorial race, we should be hearing a lot about it. We are so lucky to have Minority Leader Aric Nesbitt joining us. I'm going to just say a little bit about you, and then we can jump in to some questions.
I'm sure all accurate, right?
Well, you can correct me. You shall correct me. Your number one priority is making sure that starting and raising a family in Michigan is affordable. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Currently a Senate Republican, minority leader, and grew up on a 6th-generation family farm in West Michigan. Served as a member of Governor Rick Snyder's cabinet, managing an agency that generates nearly $1 billion annually for public education.
Best job I'll ever have, Michigan Lottery,
Anything you'd add that you want people to know about who you are?
Yeah, no, so it's Aric with an A. Middle of 5 kids, all started with A's, and by the time Mom got to me, it was either going to be Aric or Erica with an A, and I'm glad she went with Aric. I would have grown up a little tougher if it was Erica, so the boy named Sue. So I grew up in Southwest Michigan on a 6th-generation dairy and grape farm, so I know a little about hard work. I went to Hillsdale College and my degree in economics, and been the Senate Republican leader for the last few years, but most importantly, I'm a father of 3 beautiful young children, and a husband to 1 wonderful wife, and we've been married about 9 years. I have a 6-year-old. She's finishing up kindergarten. 3-year-old who doesn't understand why the 7-week-old doesn't play with his Hot Wheels and monster trucks, and why she just lays there and eats and sleeps and cries.
She'll get to be more fun. It's coming. Okay.
We caught the 3-year-old. I don't know. We caught the 3-year-old cutting his own hair last Monday.
That's a rite of passage.
It's when they went quiet. I told my wife, I'm like, didn't you do that? She's like, yeah, I was 7 though. This is 3. And one of those safety scissors fortunately didn't hunt into one of the kitchen ones. But we thought, he was just pooping in his diaper in the corridor,
Yeah.
somewhere.
Yeah.
But when it goes quiet, that you know something's up.
Yes.
So-
I mean, I think that's genius tendencies if he is so far ahead, so far advanced that he's already cutting his own hair.
Well, that's the point. Is I'm on the early end on making sure that our children have the best opportunity to grow and make sure they have the best education possible. And I think at times, reminding folks, just let kids be kids. And how do you make sure that kids can play outside and have a little fun, while also how do you make sure that they're you take advantage of the different development stages, and so when you have children yourself, it changes your whole world and the whole priorities of what's out there.
That's absolutely true. I have a 15-year-old, and I love this part of her life, but I really do miss those young years also. Let's talk about schools. Tell us about a teacher that you had that made a big impression on you and why.
Yeah, so I would say Mrs. Rummery in fourth grade, and she was our fourth grade teacher, but I also took piano lessons from her. I didn't stick with piano lessons. That's probably one thing I regret, is probably would have been a little cooler at some bars in college or elsewhere on that. But she was one of those teachers that just had high expectations for every one of her students. And some people thought she came across as cross or mean, but I look back and it was something where she identified that I had, couldn't say my R's properly, and so I was in some remedial and wed wobbin, right? Like making sure, but then knew I was a little advanced in science, and we had some, special advanced stuff that we were doing in science. In just her positive, Christian faith-oriented attitude. I mean, it was a public school, but, I only had a graduating class of 68, but I just remember her, that just the high expectations. Probably Mr. Pfister, also 8th grade math teacher. Again, just high expectations, tough as a nail, but he was one that you knew you could do it, right?
Yeah.
And so I was just blessed to have. I mean, again, I went to the same public school that my brothers and dad and grandfather, went to. I think we had about 68 in our graduating class. So, a smaller size rural school, but it was one where, growing up, you knew your classmates. It wasn't all that big of a school, and there was a lot of intimacy that was there.
That's great. When we look at Michigan is 41st in the country in terms of educational outcomes. Should you become governor?
44th in reading.
Yes, I'm using the kids count data from Annie E. Casey. So they look
Bottom
at reading,
10.
they
Bottom
look at
10.
math,
Yep.
bottom 10, right? Should you become governor, what would you do to be able to leapfrog us forward and modernize the education system?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't think it's kind of returning to basics. Let's be honest. It's people have all these ideas, but we know what works, and that's the beauty of the federalist system that we have in education, is that Mississippi was 49th 10 years ago, and they even have a more challenging demographic, economic demographic than Michigan does. And what did they do? They implemented a third grade reading law with retention. They did letter scores on performance growth of students at schools. They matched some of the teacher performance with the performance of the students through the year. They created wraparound programs early on to identify what kind of services those students need at an earlier level. And they got back to the science of reading and phonics. And it's something where you create those high expectations. You create the requirement that if you don't meet those expectations, you're just not going to go on, because we know by third grade you're learning to read. And after third grade, you're reading to learn. And this goes into, I think, also on the tail end in high school. Mike Rowe, the Dirty Jobs host, He was in Dearborn a few weeks ago, and I was in the audience, and he mentioned a very stark statistic on the other end. We're talking about elementary, but this is, for every 5 people retiring from the trades, there's only 2 that are taking their place.
That's right.
And so 25 years ago, Michigan passed the merit curriculum, and that merit curriculum says everybody's going on to college. This is what you're doing. Well, that doesn't make room for somebody like my oldest brother, Andrew, another A name, right, who spent his junior year at the Vocational Educational Center in our county learning diesel mechanics, and his senior year in work co-op. And he had a job at the tractor implement dealership on day 1 when he graduated. And so this is about creating the pathways for, and I graduated from high school with 25 college credits. I was dual enrolled.
Yep.
You gotta find those pathways, and right now, the merit curriculum in our high schools, it's mandated, one size fits all from Lansing, is not working. So we got to get back to basics in elementary school, create those expectations all the way through from the state level, superintendents, principals. We got to make sure the resource, we've increased state spending on schools by 50% over the last 5 years, and we're getting worse performance from it. The COVID lockdowns have pushed our average student 3/4 of a grade level behind, if you believe the Princeton-Stanford article last year. And when the legislature passed reading scholarships for kids that were falling behind to catch them up, the governor vetoed it.
Yeah. The other thing that happened in Mississippi, and we studied the Mississippi miracle a lot, is they've actually stuck with something for a long period of time. That's another challenge for us because they're a total red state, so they never flip administrations. And so we are running out of time. All I have are more questions, including like some of the bipartisan work that needs to happen so we can stick to things. This just means you have to come back and talk to us again.
Sounds like a deal.
Okay,
well,
cool.
Let's make it happen.
All right, it's our State of Education on 760 WJR. Stay tuned. It's our State of Education on 760 WJR, and we continue with the gubernatorial hopefuls in education, the topic of discussion.
We are so honored to have our Secretary of State here with us today, Jocelyn Benson. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for hosting this critically important conversation.
I'm going to tell our listeners a little bit about you. Jump in and correct me if anything is not accurate. One of the things that you really want to ensure is that our state is the best place to be a kid and to raise a kid. Is that right?
Yeah, and call home.
And
right?
call home.
Yeah.
You are an expert on civil rights law, on education law, and on election law. You served as dean of Wayne State University's law school in Detroit. You were appointed dean at age 36 and became the youngest woman in U.S. history to lead a top 100 accredited law school. That is so cool. And then you completed the Boston Marathon while 8 months pregnant because you're a slacker. That's amazing. All of this also helped you be ready for the Mackinac Policy Conference where we are right now, since it is such a marathon.
It is.
A lot of the media outlets have been talking about education and how, especially for our next governor, this is going to be the top priority.
Indeed.
I really want to hear your thoughts on all of it, but I want to start with asking you to name a teacher who had a big influence on you and tell us why.
My parents were special education teachers, so as parents and as teachers, they had the biggest influence on me. I went to their classrooms when I was younger, at 6, watching them, fight for their kids to have access to quality education, fill out the reports every night to make sure they were giving parents everything they needed for the kids that they were teaching. So certainly that shaped my whole view that education is the foundation for everything else. And personally also as my 10th grade English teacher was the first person to really see me as a potential solution-oriented problem solver and gave me a lot of problems to solve for the classroom, and that is what actually set me on this path path of trying to solve problems wherever I can find them. And so it was really his faith in my problem-solving abilities as well that really influenced me in developing a career around leading institutions in a way to solve problems.
You know, they say that every child needs at least 5 caring adults, and that would make all the difference. I'm thinking about Michigan as 41st in education outcomes, according to Kids Count data this year. What would you do in your role as governor to help us leapfrog the education system so that we can perform differently?
Well, when I took office as Secretary of State, I had 2 goals: to take us out of the bottom 10th for well-run elections into the top 10th. We're now number 2. Same for our DMV, which I run, which is a similarly bureaucratic system with many local offices, 130, not as many as our 800 school districts, but still a decentralized system, as our elections are as well, and reforming them in a holistic way to take them into now our DMV as a leader for the country. So I'll take that same focus on making our education system writ large, our public education system, in the top 10 in the nation, which is, I think, a goal we all share and a necessary goal if we're going to grow the talent that we need to grow with the economy in our state. So how do we get there? 5 things. Number 1, we've got to invest wisely. It's not going to be a one-size-fits-all funding approach that ensures our schools in Alpena and Hillsdale and Houghton and Grand Rapids have everything we need. We need a formula that actually takes into consideration all of the local needs of particular communities and works in partnership with those communities to ensure funding is, from infrastructure to educators and everything else, is effective for that particular community. Number 2, we can't have funding increases without strong fiscal transparency and accountability requirements, which is also important to build in not just to our budget, but to our way of governing. Number 3, investing in wraparound support for our kids, those 5 people that you say folks need. It's not just about investing in educators, it's about also investing in mental health support and other type of support for our kids and their parents, particularly in communities where it needed. Finally, 4th, developing a holistic graduation standard that takes into consideration not just reading importance, but also on all things we need to be doing to prepare our kids for the jobs of tomorrow. And then finally, in my first school budget, I will be creating a paid apprenticeship program so that all high school students and graduates can have opportunities to paid apprenticeships so that they can enter the job market if they choose to right away out of high school with the experience they need to get a well-paying job.
Like the Colorado model.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
Education is not red or blue, and we live in a proudly purple state.
Yeah.
And so it will take some bipartisan work to make advances in education. In this moment, what gives you hope for bipartisan work around education?
I think that coming out of the Mackinac Policy Conference in particular, we've seen almost universal recognition that we need to get our public school system to be in the top 10 in the country if we're going to be able to thrive as a state, and in my view, be the best state in the country to call home. So that unity of purpose, of goal, there may be many paths that we all take to get there. I think a governor can take all of those paths together and build one broad coalition path that everyone can get behind, but it will take all of our stakeholders and also public-private partnerships to work together towards that goal with a plan that we build together. And many folks like Launch Michigan, out of Business Leaders and others, and Skillman Foundation and Ed Trust, others have come up with a lot of those ideas. So we hone all of those towards a singular mission and then fight to execute that mission through a budget process and through a policy-making process and in partnership with local governments as well. So it's going to take collaboration, engaging everyone and giving everyone a voice at the table, but then being unrelenting with a timeline and metrics-driven approach to achieving that goal of being a top 10 state for education within the next decade. And my kid's future depends on it. He's 8. In 10 years, he's going to be 18. Everything we do in these next 10 years is going to affect his future and the future of all of our loved ones. So for me, it's also personal to get this done and important to take my own collaborative, results-driven approach to leadership to apply it to this issue.
Let's talk about what's happening on the federal level right now. So $2.2 billion of Michigan's school budget comes from the Federal Department of Education. Another $2 billion comes through programs like Medicaid.
Yeah.
Medicaid is the fourth largest source of federal funding for K through 12 schools in Michigan. DPSCD, Detroit Public Schools, 75% of those students rely on Medicaid. 75% of students in the Arvon School District, 79% of students in the Carleton School. So it's all across Michigan, widespread in terms of what these cuts to the budget could do to our youngest. What do we do to make up for that shortfall?
Well, first we have to minimize the budgets at the outset, and then secondly, find out if once we know the specifics of the shortfall, develop potentially public-private partnerships in the short term to make up some of that shortfall. Find ways to cut unnecessary costs and spending where we can as well to make up for that shortfall, and also develop potentially regional cost-sharing collaborations with other states to see if there's ways that we can hone our respective resources and philanthropic communities to lift all boats throughout our Midwest region. So that regional approach to also solving problems, I think, will be helpful because we won't be the only state trying to make up this shortfall. So perhaps together we could knit together a plan with other neighboring states that have additional resources or particular ideas, and through that figuring out our way together to cut through the shortfall, and then also make it as short as possible so that we can, in future budget cycles, realign our educational focus at the state and federal and regional level, and pick up the losses of a shortfall in the future through, again, restoring that federal investment down the line.
Secretary Benson, you are the first person that I've talked to who made it to the final question.
All right, I talk fast. Let's go. What's number 6?
That's fantastic. What is one piece of advice you wish you could give your high school self?
Don't give up. And so many times it's easy to think we can't make it or we can't achieve everything that we want to achieve, but one step at a time, one foot in front of the other, we can. And that's something I learned running marathons. It's something I learned leading Wayne State's law school, from being in the 4th tier of law schools to now being squarely in the top 50 in the nation. Just don't give up, be relentless, be resilient, and use every challenge as an opportunity to get stronger.
Thank you, Secretary Benson, for your time.
Thank you for having me and for your incredible leadership as well.
Thank you.
It's Our State of Education here on 760 WJR. It's Our State of Education here on 760 WJR, and we are speaking with the gubernatorial candidates about education. And Angelique, the power, the energy has come into the room.
You know, I have to say that you and I have not met before, and I was telling people that I got a chance to interview you, or that I would have a chance, and everyone said, the energy, you're going to feel the energy.
I love it.
And so
Do you feel it?
There
you go.
I'm just starting to feel it, but I feel like I'm going to feel it throughout
Thank you very much. Thank
interview.
you.
I
used to get in trouble for it. Now it's part of my life.
I want to introduce you to our listeners in case they haven't met you yet. So you have a BA and an MA in public administration, both from University of Michigan. Go Blue.
Right on.
You are a career police officer, nearly 3 decades. My father was in the force for 4 decades.
Wow.
Just so you know. You've served in a variety of positions, including corrections, patrol, narcotics, criminal investigation, death investigation, human trafficking investigation, and command operations. Right. Yes?
For the record, Monday I start my 34th year on the job.
Wow.
Yes.
That's fantastic.
So I'm trying to catch up to your family.
Yes, that's fantastic.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. And then this is something that when I read it, I realized I had seen it before. And this was during the 2020 protests, where you, in response to the killing of George Floyd, and we just marked the 5-year anniversary, you brought protesters and officers together in Flint, Michigan. And it did go viral. I do remember seeing it as something that stood out. So,
yes, ma'am.
Anything else that you would add to telling our listeners who you are, or relating it to public education in any way?
Well, I think it's important to note that I've been an educator for 27 years at the University of Michigan, Flint. And when you look at an educator and somebody who's been a teacher for nearly 3 decades on the same time that you're working in law enforcement, they're a great companion. So I know well the teacher-student relationship, and of course our Ignite program that you and the team have covered so many things. This is one of my favorite topics.
Good. Well, thank you. You know, I want to ask you about Michigan's outcomes in education.
Yeah.
But before, you mentioned you have been a teacher. Can you tell us about a teacher that has had an influence on
Oh,
you
yeah.
and why?
I just talked about it today at the UW Black Lake, the retirees. I call them seed planters. And everybody listening now can probably remember a teacher that made a huge impact on them. So, number one, Mrs. Olivet, second grade, she smoked Virginia Slim. She was my first tutor in math.
She smoked in the classroom.
No, but I'd be tutored by her, and she would smoke Virginia Slims because I remember she would see them in them long, skinny ones. Mrs. Olivet helped me get through math, which led me to third grade. Mrs. Childs, I won Race to the Moon, my division competition with Stacy Etheridge, won a Baskin-Robbins sundae. Mm-hmm. Dr. Williams, 11th grade counselor, asked me what I'm going to do when I want to get out of high school. I said to be a police officer. He goes, not with a 1.9 grade point. Dr. Avon Burns, Mott Community College. I still talk to her today. Dr. Ellis Perlman convinced me to go to the University of Michigan to get my master's in 1998. And then Dr. Suzanne Seelig, the one who hired me in 97, 4 months before I even had my degree, as an interim faculty member in public health, and I'm still there today. All of those seed planters. I could go on. I love my teachers.
That's amazing.
There you go.
That's incredible. Does being a teacher change the way that you do your work?
It does, because I know what they have done for me personally. And I think anybody listening will tell you that their own personal experience allows them to be a great testimony of what they can see in other people. And all those teachers that I just mentioned, I mean, I struggled through school growing up. I couldn't sit still. I couldn't pay attention. And I look back now, and I mean, the personality you see here as an adult is the same one who stared out the window and would dream and have visions of where he's going and be excited. And I couldn't stop talking, couldn't stop moving. But those teachers just found what's good in me and mentored me along the way. And God bless them, which has allowed me, not only just as a leader, but as a sheriff, to look at people that are incarcerated, like we talk about all the time. They've made bad decisions. They've dealt a bad hand. They've struggled with addiction and mental health, and they struggle with generational poverty. I'm a teacher to them as a sheriff with Ignite, as much as my second grade Miss Olivet was a teacher to me.
You know, Michigan as a whole is struggling with education. We are 41st in the nation according to the Kids Count data. And so the state is responsible for public education. In the role of governor, what would you do to leapfrog the education system forward?
So I don't want to take away from all the great teachers, administrators that hear the number 41 out of 50 and think, why do we even do this? I want to say that teachers and administrators and parents and all that make that work, they do everything just like anybody else would for the good of the students. I mean, across the board, we have a system with gaps, but we don't have a broken system. And you have a teacher coming in to be the governor who can sit down with whatever of the 880 school districts, public and charter, and whatever the faith-based student body is. We can all agree we need to increase those outcomes to get them best prepared to thrive and survive out in the world. And so how do we do that? What are we missing? Is it literacy in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade? I can tell you in the jail it is. Half the inmates can't read a menu, so what did? We addressed literacy. We addressed math and reading. All of those outcomes are based on, surveys and observations and test scores. But to answer your question, we changed the way we do business with the people that are in the system. Is it introducing career technical education like we do in the jail in middle school? We already have dual enrollment. Tell me if this doesn't make sense. We have students that are coming out now that are going into a sophomore year of college because they dual enroll the last 2 years. Why are we not doing that for technical schools, for software developers, for coding in middle school, 4th, 5th, and 6th grade? So maybe when they come out of high school, they can go right into the field as a iron worker or as an electrician or as a coder, making 30, 40, 50 bucks an hour. I think we need to redo the way we see education, but include the people that are already in it professionally. And that's all about leadership. Get everybody around the table who has the best results, have a plan of where we're going, and by the time we're done, we'll have an algorithm how to get there.
We are a proudly purple state here. And I think it was John Ricolta who coined the phrase, the Michigan 180, that, when we move from one administration to the next, we kind of flip on different things. And public education isn't red and it isn't blue.
That's right.
So it really needs bipartisan work to move it forward. What gives you hope for a bipartisan coalition around public education in Michigan?
So none of us listening can even predict what's going to be in 2026 with the House and the Senate, but it goes back to leadership. How do you create something that's sustainable? We did this in Genesee County with Ignite. If I never, ever run again as a sheriff, Ignite's going to live on because it's become part of our culture. And that's the difference between a program and administration and a culture change. An administration needs to build into them not only just expiration dates, but long-term sustainability. So if we're going to bring in, let's just say CTE, or we're going to bring in, encouraging teachers to get into the field by giving them state, university, free education to become teachers with a 5-year commitment, just like the military. You want to get free education to be a Michigan teacher, then serve our Michigan students. And maybe even incentivize it to those gaps in our state that they don't have a pool of teachers, but they need great teachers. All those things are sustainable long term. How do you make that happen? It's part of the bill. It's part of the long-term plan. I agree with you. It's frustrating when you just see one thing change after another, then we go back and forth. For the good of the students, we need sustainability. That's why I say I'm a product of K through jail.
Yeah.
K through 12, all the way into incarceration. And I've proven that we can have a culture change that's proven by Harvard, Brown, and Michigan, that's been picked up by Oxford and the World Literacy Foundation and the Quarterly Journal for Economics. I've seen it work.
Yeah.
And that's what we can do in the public schools.
Before I go on to my next question, you actually have mentioned Ignite twice, and I know you've talked about it before, but just in case these listeners don't know, will you tell us about that program?
That's a great question. Thank you. In 2020, you mentioned the riots. I had this plan, the seed planner, Dr. Ellis Perlman. When he convinced me to go to my master's in 1998, I graduated. My thesis was what reduces crime? And I found that it wasn't more policing or more money and harsher sentences. They'll all have their place, but it's education, hope, and value. And that was a seed that was planted that became the Ignite model. And we launched it September 2020, educating inmates incarcerated based on a meritocracy, 2 hours a day, thousands of classes and tech skills. So when they leave, there's a plan to get them their housing, get them their job, not give it to them, get them. And they now are sustainable and they don't come back and they don't re-addict and they don't re-offend and everybody wins.
You have fantastic energy, and so I just want to say I'm so grateful that you agreed to be on our show and shared your ideas around education.
I appreciate your platform. Thank you.
That wraps up this edition of our State of Education here on 760 WJR. We hope today's conversations brought you closer to the heart of what's shaping Michigan's K-12 schools. The issues affect all of us, and the future of our communities depend on how we show up for our students. We'll be back next month with more voices, more insight, more vision for Michigan's education system. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep the conversation going on our State of Education here on 760 WJR.